should. Okay, so we're continuing with the marriage counseling. And a general introduction to book of Bereshis, of Genesis, is that the stories of the patriarchs and matriarchs encapsulate and symbolize the various types of relationships between men and women. That's the main idea. It's very clear also. It's not, you don't need to be very ingrained in Chassidus to get that. That they encounter the issues that people encounter in life, and basically they seem to all encounter all of them, but certainly there are certain things that are captured more in one relationship than in the other. So with Avram and Sarah, it seems to be that they start out as very close to one another. That's what it sounds like. That they did things together, meaning their whole life until they come to Eretz Yisrael seems to be that they do things together. And nefesh asher asubachan means either they had, today we would say they were partners in their business, because the pshat, says Rashi, is that they bought slaves, that they had property. But they calls that asher asu b'chalan, that they made in Charan. Of course, somebody could say that it's talking about Lot. It's not talking about, it's talking about Avram and Sarah.
Does it mean that they work together?
They work together.
We don't know about their emotional closeness from this.
Right, but there's something about, I think it's pretty much accepted that if a couple can work together in a business, that they're at least of the same frame of mind.
Yeah.
Because you really, business is one of the places where people's different viewpoints about things come out very strongly, because it has to do with money, whether you're going to make a profit or not. So a lot of the difficult disputes in the world are regarding money. So if they could handle business together, then well, business is not exactly shlichus. The other side of it, says Rashi, is that they created converts. That really they weren't shlichus. They felt that they had a common mission, and their common mission, the first thing that Rashi says, was spiritual, was to convert people, was to bring them closer to monotheism. So they shared an ideology, and they worked together to fulfill that ideology, which was to bring people under their wings and closer to God. And then they come to Eretz Yisrael. When they come to Eretz Yisrael, something changes. Things don't work out exactly the same way. Another thing to note is that they've apparently been married for quite a while, at least 10 years.
Is this after they've already changed their names then?
Before they came to Eretz Yisrael, they were married for at least 10 years together. And according to some opinions, they were probably married much more, because why did Avram marry her? She was his brother's daughter. Right? Avram had two brothers, Nachol and Haran. Nachol was the eldest, Avram was the second, or so it seems. And Haran, the youngest, he went after Avram.
In the fire.
He followed him in everything that he did. And when Nimrod threw Avram into a trial by fire, and Avram came out, and he wasn't hurt. So he said to Haran, okay, you follow your brother. So who do you stand with? Do you want to follow him into the fire? So Haran thought that he could. And he was killed.
Rashi says that Haran said, well, if Abraham comes out, I believe him, and if Nimrod comes out...
He wasn't 100% sure yet.
Yeah.
So it didn't work out for him too well, but he had two daughters, Iska and Milka, Sarai and Milka, the other girl. And the two brothers, Nachor and Avram, they married them. They married their nieces.
And Milcah is the mother of Rivka.
Right. Well, she's the mother of Betuel, who's the father of Rivka. So she's her grandmother. So what they really did was an act of loving kindness. The whole family was very full of loving kindness. So that's why they married their nieces, in order to save them from not being able to get married, because they didn't have a father. And when you don't have a father who can pay for your nedunya, for your dowry, so there was no way that you could get married back then. So they took them in, Nachor and Avram. So they shared the ideology already from a young age. And there are different opinions about when this happened to Avram. There's an opinion that this happened when he was very young. And there's also an opinion that this only occurred sometime in his 50s, that this whole story happened. In which case, it makes sense that they were only married for a few years before they came to Eretz Yisrael. Chazal said that they were married for 10 years before they came to Eretz Yisrael. So they were already together, and they shared things. And then, in the first reading of Lech Lecha, of this week's Parsha, they go down to Egypt because there's no food, there's a famine in Eretz Yisrael. And you can't not be shocked by what happens. It's shocking. I mean, you can't. It has to be explained. These are like verses that the Torah is throwing at you suddenly, and saying, "Here, this is the big red sign over this. This has to be explained." And he says, "I know that you're a beautiful woman, so say that you're my sister." If you would stop there and just say, "So that they don't kill me," mele. But he goes on and he says, "Ulemani tavli ba'avurech," and so that also I'll become rich thanks to you. Meaning that he knows that they're going to want to marry her, and they're going to pay him for her.
Can't he say no?
Can he say no? Of course he can say no, but then how's he going to become rich?
Oh, that's the point.
So it turned out that it worked out in a different way, and he still became wealthy, and they didn't take her. Right? He didn't really have to give her away. But it's shocking. It's very hard to come to terms with this story.
But
so there's a lot of
depends on the woman.
True. From that we learn that the parnasa. It's one of the things that we learn. The Zohar learns this. He says, from this we learn that a man's parnasa depends on his wife. So this is very. It's got to raise eyebrows. Like, how could Avram say something like that? And again, if you were talking about somebody who is a servant type of wife, then you could understand what was going on. But again, from the story before of it, at the Nefesh Asher Asu B'Charan, that they either were business partners before, or that they were ideological partners, whatever it was, they were much more equal. So she had nothing to say. So why does she go along with this? Why does she accept? Doesn't she have a counter argument? Something? Let's not go to Egypt. Maybe let's go somewhere else. Maybe somewhere else it'll be better. It's a very strange reality.
In that time, women didn't really have an opinion or a voice.
So I'm trying to say that with them it's natural, and on the contrary, Avram knows. The Zohar also paints this because, sort of, we know this from later, but Hashem tells him. First of all, she had a voice because she says, "Throw out Ishmael."
Yeah.
It's just that Avram's not sure which should he listen to, his natural love for his son, or his marriage love that we'll talk about later on as we develop this for his wife. Which one is greater? Which one is greater?
We all know that.
Just out of curiosity, which one should be greater?
What were the two choices? Say that.
Your natural love towards your son, or your love towards your wife. Which one is greater?
The wife comes first, no?
It should, but the natural love to
Natural love is always stronger.
Right.
It has no ups and downs in general. Natural love being your love for your children is stronger than your love for your spouse.
Blood.
Okay?
Yeah.
And that's also one of the reasons there's a lot of differences in terms of avelus between a son and a husband and a wife. Even though in practice we make it very similar.
That's
But
why
in terms of
the marriage is a struggle, because
Right,
it's not
no,
natural.
it's
No,
not
you have to go
natural.
against your nature.
Natural.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The struggle.
So even the fact that Avram was contemplating listening to his wife rather than to his instincts says that she had a tremendous voice in his consciousness. It wasn't something. In the end, Hashem told him, "You listen to her," and he also knew this, that she was a greater prophetess than he was, that she knew more about the world than he did. The Zohar says that the reason he knew this is because she always had an angel serving her. She always had an angel protecting her. And what does that look like? It's like what people say, there's certain people who just can't get hurt. Some people are supermen or anything like that. They have like a guardian angel, that's what it's called. That you feel that they're somehow protected. And that's how he felt about her. Yeah.
But I never understood, since she had this great nevuah, why did she suggest that Abraham take Hagar when all of these horrible people were going to come out?
So Hashem doesn't show every Navi everything he wants to see. But now she sees. Okay, beforehand, sometimes he doesn't see, because Hashem has a reason for this, why he wanted this to happen. And now he did show her that in the end, if he remains, and by the way, this is probably not a question of nevuah as much as it was a practical question, because he was already close to killing him. Avram didn't see this. It wasn't clear if he even believed that this was happening. But maybe it wasn't even related to nevuah. But in any case, there are levels of what Hashem shows a person. So this much he didn't show her, I guess, that it's not a good idea in general. But even more than that, it could be that she did know this always. And that just shows her compassion for her husband. And her dedication to the ideology. Because in the end, even a person who's a prophet can't know whether a person who's not been born yet will turn out to be a Rasha or a tzaddik. It says even the angel that selects the drop of the particular cell doesn't bring a decree down that it'll be a tzaddik or a Rasha. That's up to the person himself. So beforehand, she was an ideologue, and what she believed in was that we have to create a family, even if it's not through me, but Avram has to have a family, from which the world will change. That will be the emissaries of monotheism to the world. She's a very non-typical woman in that sense. Rav Steinsaltz likes to say, the famous saying that behind every successful man, there's a great woman. So he likes to say that behind every successful man, there's a very bewildered woman, surprised. How did that happen? Right? Like, I know what he's like. How did this happen exactly? So she's very surprised, but she's not. She believes in him 100%. She believes that he has. I guess they saw that he was saved from the furnace, so they knew it was something special in Avram's faith, that regular people can't endure something like that. They can't do something like that. So to get into this topic, we need to tell a story. It's a little bit of a long story, but hopefully you'll bear with me. It's a story from the Baal Shem Tov. It's pretty famous. But like all the good stories from the Baal Shem Tov, I always forget it. And so there's a story about, I'll try to make it short. There was a big Talmid Chacham in the time of the Baal Shem Tov, who wasn't connected at all to the Baal Shem Tov. He didn't know about him. And he had two wives who had died, and then his third wife gave him one son, and she also died. And this son was very dear to him. And he was a tremendous Talmid Chacham. He lived somewhere in Slutsk or something like that in Lithuania. And this the son of his name was Shlomo, he had as a melamed, unbeknownst to the father who was a Talmid Chacham, he had a melamed who was a chassid, who was very connected to the Baal Shem Tov. And in those times, it was a little like, talking about the Baal Shem Tov was a little like a non-Jew, 200 years ago saying, I've been learning with a rabbi. And it's like you could be completely cast out for that, or killed, whatever, by the non-Jews. But it was a terrible, terrible thing to do. So he didn't let on to the fact that he was a chassid, and slowly this Melamed taught Shlomo, the young son, he taught him about Chassidus and about the Baal Shem Tov. But of course, he never told him who the Baal Shem Tov was. By the way, his identity was like a secret for a long time. As the child grew up, he got married, and he married the daughter of a very good person. And they were married for 6 years. They didn't have children, and suddenly she became mentally ill, but to the degree that she couldn't speak. She didn't do anything. Today we'd call it like a very, very deep depression. And she would sit by the fire all day long. She never changed her clothes, nothing. Today we would say the person is in a very deep depression. And she was like that for about 2 years. And eventually, they decided, there's a way to get a get in these cases, even if the woman can't agree, because she was not in the state to agree or not agree. And Shlomo wanted to get on with his life, but he didn't want to divorce her. Anyway, the Baal Shem Tov showed up suddenly in their area. And his melamed from a long time ago told him, this is the person I was telling you about. This is the Baal Shem Tov. And he might be able to help you, so go. So he convinced his father and his father-in-law to come with him to the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov heard them, and he said, I can make her well, but on one condition, that once she's well, you bring her to me, and Shlomo, you come to me, and you give her a get. So they listened to him, because and they said, we have to...
Throws off my phone calls and everything.
So they said, we have to think about it. Shlomo thought about it for a few days. They said, in the end, even though I love my wife dearly and I want to be with her, and if she's well, the more so, but if she can be well and not be with me, I prefer that she be well.
Aww.
So they went to the Baal Shem Tov and they said, we agree. So the Baal Shem Tov said, promise me that the moment that she's better, you bring her to me and you come to arrange the get. So they promised, and the father-in-law went home, and the Baal Shem Tov told him, when you get home, tell her that I want to see her. Don't forget. So he comes home, and his wife says, no, what happened? So he says, he's a great man, he's this, he's that. And he tells her all the stories that he heard about the Baal Shem Tov. And as he's telling her the stories that he heard, they didn't notice the girl, because she was always by the fire. They didn't think anything was going to happen. And suddenly she lifts her head up, and she says, the Baal Shem Tov, tell me more. So he starts, and he's again, she hasn't talked in 2 years. So suddenly she's talking, and he tells her stories, and she wants to eat suddenly, and everything changes, the whole thing. So for 2 days, but he forgot, from all the excitement, he forgot that he had promised that he would bring her right back. So they're all in, Be'orot, as we say today, they're all excited and full of excitement, and all the neighbors, they were very scared that people would know that she was well, because they thought that the original reason was some kind of Ayin Hara, because she had married the son of a very famous Talmid Chacham, and everything was very good, and they loved each other. So they didn't want anybody to know. So they also closed the doors and windows, and they locked themselves in. So for 3 days, they couldn't even remember that the Baal Shem Tov had said this. And suddenly she became ill again, but not with a mental illness. This time she had a fever. After the fever got worse, and they realized they had something to do with the fact that suddenly they remembered that it had something to do with the fact that what did the Baal Shem Tov tell us to do? Tell us to come back. So they said to her in her fever, the Baal Shem Tov that we told you about, he said that you should come to him. And they didn't tell her why. But suddenly she got stronger again. And she said, okay, let's go on the wagon. Take me there. So she was a fever, but she traveled. And on the way they called her husband to tell him she was better. And he also arrived by the Baal Shem Tov. They arrived about the same time. And, Simcha v'sason, but they're there for the get. Right? The husband knows this. Now she knows this already. By now they told her. So they go into the Baal Shem Tov's room, and he already has a scribe ready with the get. And with the ink, everything's ready, just to give the get. So the Baal Shem Tov says to them, so you know why you're here? So yes, to give a get. He says, and you're giving it willingly. They say, yes, we're giving it. He says, yes, I'm giving it willingly. She says, yes, I'm accepting it willingly. He says, are you sure? She says, we're not sure, but you told us that we have to, so we trust you, that we have faith in you that this is what has to be, because otherwise you won't be well. But we have faith in you that whatever you say, this is for our benefit. We don't know how it works. So he says, wait for me a little. So he went into the other room. And he comes out after half an hour and he says, the decree has been annulled. And then he says to them that the reason that you became mentally ill and that you couldn't be together and that I wanted you to get a get is because in Shamayim there was some decree on you, and the only way to get out of it was to separate. That was the only way. But then I waited, and I said that they have so much emunat chachamim, they have so much faith in chachamim. So that's enough to annul the decree. And my argument was accepted. So now you can go home and live happily ever after, and that's how it was. Why did I tell this story? Because the relationship between a husband and wife has ups and downs. That's how it is. Even to the point that they can get divorced sometimes. I mean, this is an interesting thing. It's not saying that their relationship was such that because they didn't get along, they needed to get a divorce. There's something about how the world works. That there was some decree upon them that they couldn't be together. And since they didn't give a divorce, or it was to force him to give her a divorce. And so the interesting thing is that the moment that they were already willing to go through it, that was already enough. But it's to say that even if you're very close, it doesn't always work out that way. Why is this? Because it's not natural love. And in Chassidus, this is Avram and Sarah are described as a relationship between the soul and the body. The soul and the body really are from two different realms altogether. And even in a tzaddik, they don't always, or they can't always work together. This is not to imply that people need to be ill. The opposite. We'll explain in a moment. It's not to imply that somehow the body and the soul have to be in dissonance, because to get a get doesn't mean necessarily that the mamish have to separate, that the person has to be ill. Rather, it implies that sometimes they just have to be separate enough for the bond to be strengthened again. So we know that in the natural course of the relationship between husband and wife, there's always, every month, there's closeness and separation, closeness and separation. if you use those times the right way, so it might be that that's enough. You don't need more than that. But that's already to say that at the core of the relationship between a husband and wife, there's times of separation. You can't get rid of it. And it doesn't have to necessarily be because one of them is a negative person or one of them is doing the wrong thing, whatever. It's just the way that the world operates. Because there's a run and return between the soul and the body. So one of the things that in Shalom Bayis that needs to be discussed is that the fact that you feel separate is not necessarily a sign that this is not a good thing. Not at all. There are times like that. In the same way that it occurs in the physical, that it also occurs in the spiritual and in the emotional. You can't always be 100% connected because, again, it's not natural love. It's love that's awakened through the relationship. And so sometimes they're closer, sometimes they're further apart. The other example of this is the sun and the moon. That the moon, because of that, and by the way, the it's mostly felt, and that's what we see in the story, it's mostly felt by the woman. It's less felt by the male. Because she's the one who became ill, and she's the one who suffered from it. And yet still, you have to accept that this is how it is. Doesn't necessarily mean, as long as they don't despise each other, there's no real grounds for saying that something is wrong, inherently. When people begin to despise one another, then you've got a real problem. Then you have to fix things from the ground up. But if it's just that we're distant, so you're distant. You can't have eternal closeness. It might be 1 in a million that does. There's always an exception to the rule. But in general, so what does it mean that they're distant? Yes.
Just when you say if they despise each other, you have to start from the ground up. What does that mean?
Meaning we have to rebuild the relationship. They need real couple therapy. And to find... Because if you despise somebody, you can't live with them. So you're like this close to losing it completely. And either most people get divorced. When divorces happen when that happens. But a lot of people come in or feel complaints, especially later in life, that they don't feel so close anymore. It's not the same thing as it was. It's true.
Out.
What?
Burnt out.
They're burnt out. Besado. Okay. That's how it works.
To fuel it.
What?
The question is, what rekindles it?
To be burnt out is beseder?
It's a natural part of a relationship. You can't always be completely close. It doesn't work. Again, because it's not natural love, meaning that it's not a natural connection.
You just have to work on it.
So what do you do in order to work on it? And you would think that to work on it would mean that we should spend more time together.
Yes.
Right.
But the truth is that it's exactly the opposite. It's exactly the opposite. If you spend more time together, when you don't have that connection, then it can really lead to a bad place. You have to know how to give each other space. In the Nimshal, this means that in our service of Hashem, there are two aspects, what we call the soul aspects and the body aspects. The body aspects are all the mitzvahs that we do. Okay? I go daven, I give tzedakah, I work, which by the way is a mitzvah to work. As opposed to some people who think that it's not a mitzvah to work. All the mitzvahs that I do, the physical mitzvot that I do,
Is cooking part of it?
cooking part of it, because it's milut chasadim, it's tremendous milut chasadim. Person comes, it's mamish, it's the ultimate form of saving a life, right? And that's what I think it was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, that my wife, when they, maybe Rabbi Chanim ben Dosa, when they ran away, so his feet were burnt and her feet weren't.
Because she gave them
She gives the loaf of bread and he gives money. He says, until you buy something with the money, the guy could die. And with a loaf of bread, he eats right away. So to give somebody who's hungry, came from the outside, like Esav. V'anochi olech lamut. The person feels like he's going to die. And you give him something to eat, it's mamash atzalat nefashot. No question. It's a tremendous form of loving kindness. So all these things, these are things that I do with my body. What do I do with my soul in this world? What is the mitzvah of the soul?
praying.
Praying, learning.
Learning. Torah. Torah is the mitzvah that we perform with our souls. In that sense, it says, "V'tamut Torah keneged kulam," that learning is equivalent to the rest. One of the simplest explanations is, how can you weigh? The sages tell us you can't weigh. But what they mean to say is they're in two different categories. In the soul category, there's really only one mitzvah. And in the body category, there's everything else.
Why is davening the soul a body?
Why is davening the body?
Oh,
First of all, because
This is a physical aspect.
you're moving your lips.
Oh.
Torah you can learn without anything at all. It's just the soul itself. But the main thing is, do you get pleasure from the mitzvah? In general, it says, mitzvot lav le'not nitnu. And in general, the mitzvot were not given in order to give us pleasure. But there's one mitzvah that you cannot perform unless you receive pleasure from it. And that's learning Torah. What do I mean?
Not an intellectual exercise.
That if it doesn't, when something makes sense to you, when you understand it, okay, it gives you enjoyment, it gives you pleasure, it gives you joy. So you can't even learn Torah if you don't get pleasure. It's almost like it's the test whether you've learned or not. Okay? If you learn and you don't understand what you're learning, it doesn't give you a pleasurable experience, then you have not understood.
What if you can't understand it all and you're still happy with it?
That means that for you it's like the Torah itself, like the five books of Moses. There you don't have to understand. You can just read it, and it gives you pleasure just because you read it. You performed the mitzvah. But when it comes to Torah Shebaal Peh, when it comes to understanding Torah, the oral Torah, it has to connect. You have to feel that you understood what happened, what you were learning. And when you understand something, you get pleasure from it. So it's like it's almost the opposite. You can't learn Torah unless you get pleasure. How do you know you're learning? Because you're getting pleasure. Because you understand what you're learning. You follow?
Well, but there's...
Because if you didn't, then we have to say it again until you get the pleasure from it.
What's the definition of understanding? I mean, oral Torah, that's
How do you measure understanding?
Besides
When you get pleasure. When you get pleasure. That's how you know. When it causes you joy...
I get joy and I don't understand half of it.
I said that's like
So
from
you
the
get
oral
credit
Torah.
for the understanding of the half?
When it comes to the oral Torah, you have to understand.
What's the difference? Is that Gemara? Is oral...
What we're learning now is like oral Torah.
Oh, Hasidus.
No, because this is Dafka no. But the way we're teaching is that if you didn't understand, then you didn't...
So this
it's not the
doesn't-
mitzvah of learning
This
Torah.
doesn't apply to written Torah.
No, written Torah you can just read, and the light itself gives you the whatever experience it gives or doesn't give, it doesn't matter. You perform the mitzvah. But when it comes to oral Torah, you have to understand, otherwise it's not the oral Torah. Oral Torah, by definition, means that you understand it. 'Cause that's the whole point. It's to explain the written Torah. But if I didn't explain, it's not oral Torah. It's just words that I said. Okay? If it's a good explanation, it causes me a lot of pleasure. because any understanding that a person gains leads to pleasure. Okay.
And then in Hasidus, which is a
So
pleasure of it.
certainly, without question, the way that we teach Hasidus, it's like oral Torah. But the Alter Rebbe writes that Hasidus is so, like the Zohar, it's so a part of the essence of the Torah that even if you don't understand, you still get the sachar, you still get the value of having performed the mitzvah. But certainly that's not that's not what I'm aiming for. That's not what in general people aim for. They aim for the understanding. So if I'm aiming for the understanding, I'm using Hasidus as oral Torah. Okay, but
And what about women don't have to learn Torah?
they don't have to, but you still get the sachar. Like somebody who wasn't commanded and he still does. He still gets the reward.
So today it's
What?
no the fact that women don't have to. But today women want. And they
So?
want that oneg. They want
Okay.
that.
Settle.
And they can.
Yeah,
Things
it
have
just goes
changed.
to show that there's a lot of pleasure in Torah. Yeah. And on the other hand, I mean, I've seen many things. When women go to daven, it's something else. It's just a performance of the act. It's the act that gives the feeling of I want to be part of this.
I want to be part of the minyan.
Part of the daven.
It's not part of the-
They're interested in the ritual.
Or even at home. No.
They're interested more in the ritual.
No, I think women, they're very much about the connection,
Okay.
which is different from ritual.
It could be part of the community. Rituals connect communities.
Okay, so you're saying officially go into that Knesset.
Can. If you daven at home alone, that's something else.
Hannah.
Okay. She taught us how to daven for real.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that what women connect to when it comes, you don't get the pleasure from the davening itself. You get the pleasure from the ritual, from the connection with the people, from the whole setting.
That's different than understanding.
It's not understanding. There's no new understanding that you get when you daven. If you know how to daven like Chana, then maybe that's where all your understanding comes from. But that you don't need to do in a Beit Knesset. That you don't need to do with the minyan. That you don't need to do at set times. You can do that any time that you want. And that's more like already like Reb Nachman's Itbodedut. Yeah. So that's a whole different thing. When people connect, especially the women that want to daven today, so what they're connecting to mostly is to be part of the community. That's what they want. The ritualistic part of it is what drives. In any case, getting back to this, so our toil in this world is divided into two: the part that belongs to the body and the part that belongs to the soul. Which one is Avram? Which one is Sarah? So it's not hard to guess. Avram represents the soul part. The male usually represents the soul. And the female represents the body. So Sarah is the body. So like we said, there are good days and bad days. You can't have that it's always great. It doesn't work that day. So sometimes it's Chaz v'shalom should be from an organic illness. And sometimes it's an accident that you had or something that happened to you. The connection between the body and the soul doesn't always work 100%. And even more than that, you don't even have to go into those areas where something's not working properly. Just the fact that some days you can focus more, and some days you're better at what you do. And so the work with the body, meaning the soul gaining from the work of the body, is working very well. And some days it doesn't. You wake up late, you wake up tired, it doesn't go your way, nothing works away. And the mitzvot that you try to do, you don't do them so well. What do you do when something like that happens? So the answer is Imri na achotiyat. You have to tell the body, you're not my wife, you're my sister.
This is
where it
Abraham
comes
telling
from.
Sarah.
Okay? That's how the Rebbe interprets this. He says, it's not even the Rebbe, it's his father. His father, on the note on the Zohar, he says, as the Rebbe just repeated it in the Sifa, and he explained it a little bit more, and I'll try to explain some more. So again, there are many, many different attempts to answer what was going on there. This is taking it into marriage and into personal life. And
Is it more natural to love your sister because she's blood? Like
hold on. So we'll see what it means. So at first you might think something like that, but it's a little bit deeper than that. It's actually even almost reversed. But we'll see in a second. It has nothing to do with what we talked about before, that the natural love is constant. We'll see in a moment. When I say to the body, when the soul says to the body, say that you're my sister, brotherly love, says the Rebbe's father, really what I'm doing is I'm falling back on my natural love for God. Meaning you're my sister in loving God. There are two types of passion or connection to Hashem. There is the connection to Hashem that comes out of toil with the body, and that is called like being a spouse to Hashem. We're down here like we're his wife. And I come down specifically into the kitchen, into his kitchen, this is Hashem's kitchen, to prepare the food, to do everything that's needed, and so on and so forth. And that way I'm mefarnes the husband. I'm giving parnasa to Hashem. It's called avodat tzorech gavoa. That the mitzvot that we do, they give Hashem his parnasa, as it were. That's what it means, that the parnasa is dependent on the wife. It's also true in our relationship with Hashem. It's as if Hashem created the world in such a way that he said, my parnasa is going to depend on your actions. Tzorech gavoa. That our toil is needed above. Okay? That's what it means to be a woman in this world, meaning a wife. I'm Hashem's wife. But some days I go into the kitchen and everything burns, and I cut myself, and food's not ready on time, and you know what? Get out of the kitchen. Leave the kitchen alone. It's not for you today. What do you have to say to the body? Now we're going to be brothers to Hashem. Imrina achotiat. You and I are brothers, and our connection with Hashem is brotherly love. It's not because we're going to give him parnasa. It's something else entirely. What is it? It's what we call the soul's duties. What the soul can do, and that's to learn Torah. Step out of the kitchen, go learn something. Go sit by yourself. Why? What does that do? Says the Rebbe's father, it awakens the natural, learning Torah awakens the natural love for Hashem. But when I learn Torah, the body isn't a part of it. It's mostly the soul. So he says it's even more than that. Why is she the sister and not the brother? Here in this case, the soul is the brother, and the body, or Sarah, is the sister. Because it's true that the body naturally doesn't have the same level, doesn't lo malbicha. It can't value, or it can't appreciate what it means to love Hashem naturally.
What can't appreciate
The
it?
body doesn't appreciate loving Hashem naturally.
What does that mean?
Why? Because the body doesn't feel dependent on Hashem. That's the big difference. The way that Hashem creates physical matter has no consciousness that it came from Hashem. So the body doesn't recognize it. It has natural love, but it has to be awakened. You have to tell it. The soul, on the other hand, always feels that its origin is in Hashem. The soul is created by what we call inner light. Inner light means that it experiences, it appreciates its source. It can feel its source. The soul knows where it came from. The body doesn't. because most of us identify very strongly with our bodies. So in general, our experience in life is what in Chassidus is called mitziuti matzmuti. I came out of myself. There's no feeling that at this moment I'm coming out of God. There's no feeling like that. Nobody experiences that, unless you're Avram. Avram was the first person to experience that. And so that's what he tells Sarah, come with me now, so that we can experience together. I'll show you now how we both come out of Hashem. The body too, not just the soul. How says the Rebbe's father, how can you do that? When the soul engages in learning Torah, and it explains things to the body. How do you explain things to the body? So here's where Chassidus comes in, but in general, the whole point, as we'll see in a moment, this is a whole the next topic. The whole point of learning is to be able to explain to my physical senses everything that I learned in Torah. If I can't explain it physically at the level that a physical being can understand this, if I just talk about Chokhmah and Binah and I don't explain what Chokhmah and Binah is, I've done nothing. I've left the Torah out there and the experience of Hashem out there, and we're not brothers. The body and me are not brothers. The soul and the body don't become brothers. But it's up to the soul to make that effort to explain to the physical side of my being what the Torah is talking about. So if you're learning...
Is this the meaning of what the Rebbe always said, that you learn Torah lemaaseh?
Ma'u v'chen. What comes out of this? Uv'chen doesn't necessarily mean that you have to get up at this moment and do it. But if it has no physical consequence, if there's no nafkamina, as it's called in Gemara, so really you haven't done anything. Doesn't mean you haven't learned. Maybe you've learned. But in terms of brotherly love, it means that I have to be able to explain to you everything that I understand. And if I can't explain it in physical terms, and the body, what we call the animal soul, doesn't get it, then I haven't done anything. Because again, what am I saying here? That the animal soul, the body, is now in a state where it's difficult for it to work. Nothing is working out. It went into the kitchen, it tried to do mitzvahs, its heart isn't there, it's not doing it right, everything's, shlamazel. And it needs to strengthen itself again. How do you strengthen? By the soul doing its own work for a while. But then coming back and explaining to the body, what does this all mean? So let's carry this over to the relationship between a husband and a wife. Sometimes when the relationship between husband and wife doesn't work, so what do they need to do? It's like to separate. The husband has to, the male part, the soul part, has to engage in Torah, and only then come back after it's learned, after it's filled itself, and it has something to say, then to come back and to re-engage.
And learning Torah together doesn't help.
I said,
it's not good.
If even when they learn Torah together, usually it's the husband explaining to the wife.
She's not in
Well, you're
position to
saying
hear.
no. So maybe she knows a lot also, but still, it's like you're saying it's after they've come back together again. Now he has something to say so that she understands. But before that, he has to have some learning by himself. That state of solitude, it's necessary. It's as if the soul needs this, and the body has to recognize that the masculine has something in it that's outside the world. It's not entirely connected to this relationship. So you don't want to get to divorce. Even though here in the story, that's what he says. There's like a decree on you that at this moment you have to be so separate that it's like you were willing to get a divorce. But again, not because you don't get along, because this is how it is now. But since you have emunat chachamim, you're willing to trust me that this is what's needed now, then you'll be able to get back together again. So don't be afraid of it. Don't fear it. Just have trust in Hashem. Here the Chacham is Hashem, who's telling you right now it's like separate. Have trust in Hashem that this is what's needed right now, and we'll get back together again afterwards. Of course, you have to do what's needed. What's needed is that the male has to engage in Torah during that time. He has to go into the world of Torah. He goes into the world of Torah, then he can come back. But if he doesn't go into that world, then there's no brotherly love holding it together. At this point, I'm not sure if this point is understood, but brotherly love again means natural love. The soul has a revealed natural love for Hashem, and it feels that love when it learns. You say it entirely different. Okay? In different language altogether. That, or maybe I won't be able to say it exactly altogether, different, but at least in principle. We started with this, that each one of the couples between the matriarchs and patriarchs, they represent a different type of love in a relationship. So Avram and Sarah, even though they represent the mind, their chokhmah and bina, their wisdom and understanding, and therefore they never part. But still, when they come down into physical form, they're a man and a woman.
Wasn't there a time that they were separated, living separately from each other?
Avram and Sarah?
Sometime.
Why?
There wasn't such a time before the Ikedas. Where was he and where was she?
Well, physically, he was there and she was there, but
Before the Ikeda was
Moshe Rabbeinu.
one of them in Hebron and one in Beersheba.
I remember
Further
something like that.
research.
Yeah. So again, the when they come down, so even though the wisdom and understanding don't really part, they're supposed to always be together. When they come down into physical bodies, they're two people. What's the problem with being wisdom and understanding? It's that if you don't exercise your wisdom and understanding, if you don't exercise your understanding, if you don't meditate, if you're not looking at the world trying to reveal Hashem, then there's no natural love. It's a very strange thing. Meaning, in other words, if he's not working with Sarah right now at this moment, if he's separate from her, then he doesn't come to what we call the love that comes from meditating on the world. I think we said this in a different context, that love means that you do things together. A person can't say, I love you, and not do anything with you. What is it? Again, you have to share something. So by Avram, what that means is that he is willing to work with her. That's what he said. They had this before they came to Eretz Yisrael. They shared things, they did things together, and they were successful in what they did. And from this, Avram came to know Hashem even more, from his connection with his wife. But now there are times, when you go down to Egypt, it's like a time of galus, that the body has some kind of disconnect from the soul. And the soul doesn't know how to connect with the body in order to reveal Hashem more. So the love doesn't come from the engaging one another. Right? The soul, when a person does a mitzvah, he feels connected to Hashem. But what if I don't feel like doing a mitzvah? It doesn't work. It's not happening. So I can't uncover, this is called intellectual love, because it's not natural. It requires work. It requires meditation. It requires me to do something. So what do I do when I don't have that? So I have to go back, I have to fall back on something more natural. The more natural is what the Tanya calls hidden love, concealed love. And that love is described as a love between brothers, that it's always there. You don't need to meditate. You don't have to think about something. You don't have to engage it in order to understand. You don't have to be. What's the love between brothers? Love between brothers is that even if they don't see each other for 20 years, the love doesn't change. But that's exactly its problem, because it doesn't change. It also doesn't get any stronger. It's always the same level. Obviously there's abominations of it. No, I wasn't thinking so much about them. I was thinking more about should parents be worried when their little when a boy and girl in the family are hugging each other? Okay? No, and even when they're older. Why? Because it's natural love. Unless something really strange happens, this is all it's going to be ever. It can't develop. That's its weakness. Its strength is that regardless of how little interaction there is, it's always there. So it's very constant. Yeah.
So it seems funny, like in terms of Bereshis, there's so many problems with brotherly love from the beginning. It's not till Aaron and Moshe that we actually see brotherly love that doesn't have all kinds of undercurrents of hatred. So it seems funny to pick brotherly love as something connected with Bereshis as something that's naturally there.
That's a theory. In practice,
No, I don't think it's because it's in practice different. I would say on the contrary, that because Esav and Yaakov are really brothers,
twins.
In the end, the redemption is dependent on this love. You can't run away from it. You can do anything you want. They can fight, and they can want to kill each other, and whatever. But in the end, that's where the redemption will come, when they learn how to get along together. That's why Yaakov thought, if Esav is ready, I'm ready too. It turned out Esav wasn't ready yet. So Yaakov said, I'm not ready either.